You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 133. This podcast is dedicated to Circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and foes, I'm Shannon McKenna, and I am the host of the Artist Athlete podcast. Yep, I am a professional aerialist who travels all around the world teaching, performing, and interviewing people about circus. If you want to follow my journey, if you want to hear more about me, I have a whole other part of the podcast that's available on patreon.com/theartistathlete, which slides in every week in addition to these main episodes as I think of them. That's just about what I did this week, what I'm reflecting on, how I'm training, how I'm eating, all that kind of like stuff. It doesn't even really sound interesting how I'm eating. What the heck? But anyway, if you want to hear about it, it's there, patreon.com/theartistathlete. It's also the only way that this podcast exists is through amazing contributions from amazing people just like you who love what they're listening to and want more of it. So if you love what you're listening to, go to patreon.com/theartistathlete and sign up to become a Patreon today. There's no better time. My guest today is Elsie Smith, which is so cool to me because she was one of my first coaches. And it was so surreal to sit down in a fort that we had constructed out of crash mats inside the studio where I first really started training and like really knew what it was like to train at a professional level. I was sitting in one of those studios and asking my coach all of these questions 10 years later. So if you want to see a picture of us hanging out in a fort, you can look at that on Patreon. But let me tell you about Elsie Smith. Elsie Smith is a founder of the New England Center for Circus Arts, Nimble Arts, and Gemini Trapeze. Together with her twin sister, Serenity, she performed for Cirque du Soleil's Saltimbanco for 4 years as a duo trapezist. Her performances have garnered the bronze medal at the International Festival Cirque du Soleil and the special award at the China Wugao International Circus Festival. Elsie is taught and choreographed for many companies, including Pilobolus, Cirque du Soleil, Circus Smirkus, Frequent Flyers Aerial Dance Festival, Viva Fest, and SeaWorld San Antonio. She has a coach's certification in trampoline, and she and Serenity have developed a unique curriculum and teaching methodology for aerial arts. She is a founding member of the American Circus Educators Association's Safety Committee and the American Circus Alliance. In 2016, the sisters won the American Circus Educators Award for Excellence in Education and the Walter Cerf Medal for Outstanding Achievement in the Arts from the Vermont Arts Council. In 2021, she served as a grant review panelist for the National Endowment for the Arts. Here's my interview with Elsie Smith. Elsie Smith, welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's great to be here.
I know, in our little fort.
I know. In the original studios at the building where we first met.
It's true. Oh my God. Full circle moment.
We're not going to say how many years ago that was.
No, we won't. Though I was climbing the stairs to get here and just having so many flashbacks. How did I climb these stairs every day? Oh my God. Anyway, enough about me. Who are you, Elsie? What do you do in the world?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a huge question.
Yeah, I know.
What do I do in the world? Some days I just exist, which I think a lot of us are doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Some days I feel like I make a little bit of a difference in the lives of some of the circus people that I get to cross paths with. Those are the good days. And some days I get these really lovely emails from people that I taught, 15 years ago who come back to me and they're like, oh my God, you made a huge difference in my life. And those are really, really good days.
Cool. Amazing.
But yeah, what do I actually do on a day-to-day basis? I'm actually, I'm an administrator of a huge not-for-profit arts organization. I also teach a lot of circus, which there's that balance between those of us who teach and administer that can be really hard. And I don't know that I would want one without the other.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, there's the hard days when you're teaching, when the students are like, why is it this way? And I didn't get my trick, and I'm tired, and I'm cold, and I'm, all those sorts of things. And then you're like, oh my God, I just want to go edit photos from the photo shoot I did because they don't talk back to me and say nasty things. And then, we have a COVID task force that has been running for 2 years, and we have meetings way more often than I would like to talk about all the things COVID related.
Yeah.
And after an hour of talking about whether we're going to have a show masked or unmasked or indoors or outdoor, I just really want to go hold safety lines for someone who's learning a full twist to ankles on the swinging trapeze.
Sure.
So definitely goes back and forth.
Gotcha. That's, yeah. All right. So let's take this back to like small Elsie and small Serenity. So Elsie has a twin sister. Her name's Serenity. Yeah, let's take this to the very beginning. You grew up in Western Massachusetts,
Yep,
right?
In a log cabin with no running water and no electricity. We were actually born, our parents were living in a tent because my dad had been kicked in the face by the horse that he was using to haul logs to build the cabin. So they thought they were going to have a boy in March, and 2 babies, 2 little girls arrived in January in the middle of a snowstorm. My mother says it's because she went horseback riding.
In a tent?
We weren't born in the tent. We actually were born in the hospital.
Okay.
That later was turned into a mental institution, but that's a whole other story.
Right.
But, we didn't have sort of a typical upbringing. But by the time we were in our teens, sort of our typical activities were climbing trees, taking care of brothers and sisters, working our dad's sawmill, and walking home from school with the giantest stack of books I could possibly get from the library, and basically keeping my head stuck in books. We were both basically academics. Our family, really appreciated learning. My dad made us write essays on books during, summer break and things like that. And then we had a chance to try the flying trapeze. And my mom actually was like, oh, let's go try that, girls. And I was like, it looks terrifying, but I can't let my mom do it and just sit here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I followed her up the ladder. She swung, Serenity and I swung. I actually sat down for the next week. We had a week-long opportunity to try this. And my mom and my sister kept going up. And finally, like Thursday or something like that, I decided I would try it again. And then I was kind of hooked. Yeah. So that was our first circus. And then I went back to university. We were early enrollment at university. So we were 17 and at university when this experience first came. No gymnastics, no dance, lots of tree climbing.
Got it.
And there we go, a little bit of circus. And then I went back to college and was hanging out with a friend who was super excited about a summer camp she was going to get to teach at. And she was a music major. And she had the catalog, and she was showing me the catalog. And I was like, wait, that looks like Circus. And she said, oh yeah, they have Circus that's at the Performing Arts camp. And I had this brilliant idea that I thought, gosh, if they've hired you with no experience teaching music to teach music at this camp, they must be hiring some people to teach circus. Maybe they'll hire people who don't have any experience with circus. So at the time, I was a primary caregiver for my youngest 2 siblings. So I was, college and home. And so I called Serenity, who had a freer lifestyle at that point. And I was like, Serenity, I found this summer job. You should call them up and get a job. So she called up and got hired. And about 2 weeks before the job started, I decided that staying at home for the summer was not the best thing for me. And I called up and said, would you like another one of us? And they said, of course. So Serenity and I taught circus for the summer. And it was full on summer camp, traditional everything. We had about a week of training, and we learned how to teach fire eating, trick roller skating, double trapeze, tight wire, like full on high tight wire. All the board work and line holding for flying trapeze, Spanish web, triple trapeze, teeterboard, you name it, we got thrown into all of it. I have no clue how it worked. Somehow it worked. By the end of the summer, neither one of us wanted to go back to college.
What what camp was this?
French Woods Festival of Performing Arts.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
which is still, awesome today. Really great place to go. Yeah. So that was it. That was Circus. That was, me learning how to be a teacher. I didn't actually get to do a lot. But we met a lot of really cool people from all over the world, obviously, but specifically a couple people who are Ringling Brothers performers. And at the end of the summer, a lot of other things happened. We don't have to go into all of the details, but Serenity ended up being hired as a replacement dancer. Notice neither of us have any dance training.
Yeah, she's doing air quotes right now. You can't see it, but she is. Yeah.
And she got hired as a dancer because she could do Spanish web for Ringling Brothers. So she sort of waved goodbye and headed off to Ringling Brothers. And at the same time, I had fallen in love and stayed with the company that was the company that had been hired to teach for the summer camp, which was Circus of the Kids. And so we did self-esteem workshops around the Eastern Seaboard, teaching circus in, foundling homes, community centers, high schools, elementary schools. So that was sort of a shift from just teaching circus into teaching circus with a little bit more of a purpose. So going from, basically I started circus with what's called recreation, which is like that flying trapeze thing. And then I did the sort of like circus camp fun. And then I did social circus.
I didn't know that part of it, the social circus part, but it makes NECA's mission a little bit more obvious like a little bit more, it makes it make sense a little more.
And then when you also connect that to the fact that I was teaching social circus while Serenity was going off with traditional circus. I mean, she lived on a train.
Right.
She did the full-on Ringling Brothers, elephant riding, train around the country, showgirl stuff. And that really, I'm glad you noticed that, because that really informs what we try to embody at NECA and connect sort of all of the traditions of circus into one home where you can come from all of those different backgrounds, and we honor all of them and respect them.
Yeah. Cool. I do want to be mindful of the time and ask you a bunch of questions about NECA and Nimble Arts and all that. So, but it's not to be missed, or like I want to, so we'll speed through it. But, so you and Serenity then rejoined as twins and were hired by Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah, with no training. She had been working.
I'm noticing a theme here with you guys.
Exactly. I did, we did a lot of teaching. I did get trained as a trampoline coach when I lived in Canada for a little while. Serenity ended up with the Pickle Family Circus in San Francisco, which is again sort of the start of contemporary circus in the United States. And through that, we both came back together in San Francisco. I became the administrator of what is now the Circus Center. And then when her Pickle Family Circus contract ended, there was an audition for Cirque Productions, actually. And I said, Seren, do you want to throw something together? They're looking for 2 girls on the trapeze. And so we literally took 3 days to throw something together and got hired. And then eventually, 2 twins on a trapeze is something that Cirque du Soleil had featured. And they were shutting down some shows back in the days when they actually shut shows down. They shut down Saltimbanco and hired many of the Saltimbanco cast to other shows. So the identical twins were then hired for O. And then they decided to have Saltimbanco.
They restaged
it. And they were like, gosh, now we need identical twins on the trapeze. And someone saw our photograph on the wall of the circus school in San Francisco. And they called us after 2 failed auditions in person where they said, you don't tumble. And I said, I know, I'm an aerialist. They called up and they said, can you do a private audition in Montreal? So long story short, yes, we got that contract and spent 4 years doing duo swinging trapeze on Saltimbanco, having never done duo swinging trapeze before that audition. Don't ask me how we did it. It's silly.
No, I don't want to ask you how you did it. But it's a cool story because, I mean, I think it's really reassuring to people who audition for Cirque and get turned away or get like that doesn't mean all is lost if you have one audition and they're like, no, we don't want you.
And again, like no ballet, no gymnastics. We were 27 at the time. I did my first walkover when I was 24. I did my first pull-up when I was 24. You have to bring something unique to the table, and being an identical twin certainly helped with that. But all is not lost if you don't have that background that we think of as, having done gymnastics since you were 4 sort of thing.
But watching how circus has grown and the trajectory of it, do you still think that's true today?
It's harder, I think, and I actually struggle with that question when we do auditions for our professional training program, because I see that the prerequisites that we have to even be in a professional training program are so limiting, while they're also very well thought of in terms of the physical safety of a human who is going to be doing incredible things with their body for 40 hours a week for 3 years in a ProTrack program, for example. We have to look at whether or not your hamstrings are open enough, whether your shoulders are open enough, whether your back is mobile enough. And I think that those requirements, unfortunately, mean that some really amazing circus performers are not being invited to circus schools, and it kills me. I haven't figured out how to fix it, but I definitely
But you would
know
have
that.
to think that, like, for the discipline also, like a juggler maybe doesn't need, not necessarily.
But they're
depending.
being expected to have that now. Maybe not as much as someone who's maybe going to do straps or contortion,
Yeah.
but they're still being looked at through a lens of full body capacity, which on the other end does really make some pretty amazing performers who do have full body capacity that's even bigger than the specific needs of their apparatus set.
Right.
Right? Like if someone does basing on partner acrobatics and they can go into a full split and do a full back bend, that's amazing. It opens up the performative elements so much. But to use those criteria to limit them from ever starting their career, I think is where we're probably losing a lot of really amazing circus performers. I perform with people all the time who would never get into circus school and are the most amazing performers on stage. So would I have gotten into Cirque du Soleil with that history and that story today? I have no idea.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
For sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions was about, as I've traveled the world and seen many different circus situations, what's impressed me, especially being in Europe or being in Canada, is that there's cultures and foundations of youth circus that exist a little bit more now, but don't really exist in America. And as a professional training program, do you have strategies, or do you feel pressure to have strategies to kind of like almost catch up a class to compete in the international market with those same people? Or do you see NECA as a place that does the same thing as like an ENC or, Tilburg or the Canuck or something like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And again, it's sort of one of those things I struggle with because personally, I totally see the benefit of youth being exposed to circus and practicing circus for years before they choose to embark on a professional training program, without sort of going into the issues of sort of injuries from training at a young age. Right. Certainly training gymnastics, ballet, and circus from a young age does really inform you as an artist and a practitioner. At the sort of late teens and early 20s when people usually go to circus school. But maybe it's the background I came from, I came from, no digital, not just because I'm, on that age where I didn't grow up with TV and computers and stuff, but because I didn't have electricity, so it really was like go get a book and climb a tree kind of thing. The idea of allowing kids to just play and find things to do is really important to me. So I get parents all the time who are like, my 12-year-old loves to do circus. I want them to be doing 15 hours a week because that's what they were doing in a gymnastics program, or 40 hours a week in a gymnastics program. And I say to them, our youth troupe is 4 hours a week. They could do other classes if they want, but philosophically, I don't personally want kids to be that embedded in one thing at a young age.
Yeah, sure.
So I struggle with that contradiction between like a professional training program that is going to be better and better if the people applying for that professional training program have a huge amount of experience under their belts, and the beauty of having someone who's experienced circus for 1 year but is also a painter and a lacrosse player,
Right.
and traveled to Europe for a season with their school.
Yeah, sure.
Are they going to be more interesting on stage later because they have that life experience? I see it go both ways.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because one of my other questions kind of along those lines was, at the National Circus School in Montreal, the goal is one act. You have 3 years, you make your act. That's like what the mantra is.
Yeah.
At the Connect, it's more ensemble-based work where they're directed toward like you make a company and that company goes out and is funded by the French government to perform all over the place, At the end of Pro Track, what do you envision for the students who go through that program?
Yeah. What I envision, and is what the program is built on, is that at the end of 3 years, they have a major act and a minor act. In my experience post Cirque du Soleil, it was always really beneficial for me to have, 2 or 3 different offerings.
Yeah.
And you never know when someone says, well, I just don't have the rigging for swinging trapeze. Can you do a sear wheel act?
Mm-hmm.
Or in my case, Serenity decided to have kids, so can I do a solo act?
Yeah.
And so I think the other part of it is that financially, Americans and just my own personal history is I needed to be able to put dollars in my pocket. I couldn't graduate from circus school. I didn't go to circus school, but it was never in the cards for me to be able to dabble in something and focus more on like my art instead of actually doing the gigs. I needed to pay my rent.
Yeah.
And I see that in circus performers today is at the end of your professional training program, I want my students to be able to get work. And if they have 2 viable acts, it's just a little bit easier for them to get work. And there's a little bit of a mental health part of it too, right? It's like when you're just banging your head over that contortion act that you just hate right now, and you've got the little back problem, and it's just not working.
It's all coming back to me.
It's all coming back to you, right? You're like, I'm just going to do my straps act.
Yeah,
I'm going to go climb the rope, right?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that I think is really, really valuable. And the more broad your skills, the more hireable and the happier you're going to be, I think.
Last question about the professional training program. One of the big differences, sometimes people message me and they're like, I want to go to Circus College at NECA. And I'm like, whoa. College is an accredited educational system that like has, these like requirements to be able to be called a college. NECA is not that. Do you have any aspirations to build that into it?
Yes and no. Again, this is sort of, my own personal conflicts is I would love to be able to say that NEC is accredited, that you can get a degree at the end of it.
Yeah.
However, you might have, you're starting to hear a theme. It's like financially, it costs us. Well, about 10 years ago, it would have cost us about $10,000 in order to become accredited. And you have to hire additional people who are not the coaches to manage the accreditation part of it. As soon as we add that extra money in, you as a student are going to have to pay more for that benefit.
Okay. What's the tuition cost at NECA right now, though?
Honestly, I don't remember because we had to increase it. We decided not to increase it during the pandemic, and so we just increased it. So it went from, I think, $10,500 a year, and next year it's going to go up. Not as much as it should, but as much as we could, because we're trying to make sure that we don't hit students with huge amount of finances. But so I guess I've always sort of had in my brain, like, I don't want to charge someone for something that they're not going to need. And I personally have not seen people say, oh, I've got Shannon who's applying to do straps in my show. And I've got, Joey over here who also has a straps act. But Joey has a degree from an accredited institution.
Right.
So I'm going to hire Joey. It doesn't actually work that way.
Right.
So right now, it is not my personal goal. But within the institution, we're definitely investigating it because it is something that we get asked about. And it may be something in the next 5 or 10 years that actually becomes more beneficial for people, along the lines of like, if you want to be a teacher of circus, or you want to teach circus like at a university. So as a career benefit, it might end up being beneficial. But right now, I don't see the benefit for it.
Interesting.
Oh, hey there. I just wanted to interrupt this interview real quick to just say one real quick little thing about myself, which is that I am not only the host of the Artist Athlete podcast. No. She is a businesswoman, and I run a whole company dedicated to the education and inspiration of circus artists. That goes from people who are just doing it weekend warriors as a hobbyist, recreationally, or if you're a professional, you've put in the hours and you need more resources, go to theartistathlete.com. There are a ton of recorded workshops, online manuals and ebooks, everything you could possibly need from me and from some guests on this show about everything from nutrition to training your shoulders to really specific aerial moves that you need to master. Again, theartistathlete.com. And just because you went there from listening to this podcast, use code PODCAST and get 15% off your entire purchase. That's right, theartistathlete.com. Use code PODCAST at checkout for 15% off your entire purchase. And have a great day. Back to the episode.
So you have another company. You have the New England Center for Circus Arts, which is NECA, which is the thing we've been talking a bunch about. And then you have Nimble Arts, which is a whole other thing. What's Nimble Arts?
Right now, Nimble Arts isn't very much because we got hit so hard by the pandemic.
What was Nimble Arts and what could it be again?
So
Maybe that's the
Nimble
better
Arts
question.
was a production and performing company, and also the structure with which Serenity and I teach workshops outside of NECA, specifically teacher training workshops. That was sort of our big focus.
Yeah.
So back when we got started, in the dark ages, there, fabric was just becoming a thing, growing out of the rope background. Trapeze, all those sorts of things were really traditional circus taught by, ex-performers, sort of one-on-one, maybe small classes. And when we started to get into things, we saw that there wasn't a lot of codification. And I'm really fascinated by sequencing and progressions and language. And then as I started to get back into teaching after Cirque du Soleil, I met Susan Murphy from Canopy Studios, and she introduced me to Laban work. And I started really thinking about how we could express, and I'll use fabric as an example, express a choreography sequence in language as teachers. At that point in time, aerial fabric was really being taught the way that we would maybe teach a choreography. You go into a dance class and you're like, we're going to learn Susan's choreography today, and you learn a whole sequence. And in dance class, there's also language for each of those steps. But on aerial fabric, you would just learn Susan's choreography, and there was no language for the individual steps. So Serenity and I together started working on how to create better language around all of the different things and some of the aerial progressions. So for example, geek out a little bit.
Let's
for
go.
the aerial fabric people, a single star, right? You might just be, okay, do the single star. Well, the language around that is a same side inversion, add a crucifix, put a leg wrap on. There's a waistband or seat belt or a belly wrap with a crucifix across the back. It's so much easier, I think, to communicate as teacher to teacher, teacher to student when you've got more language. So that was a big focus of ours that then led into starting to do teacher trainings that we're also teaching people how to spot, how to create class progressions. And that was the big heart of Nimble Arts. And then, like I said, we also did, corporate events, and we, hire people to do shows and stuff like that. And both of those activities, because of the pandemic, withered away. The teacher training specifically, because we focus on hand spotting and that close proximity, we decided that we didn't want to go digital with that. So during the pandemic, we've passed people to other folks who are doing digital teacher trainings, but it wasn't the heart of what we wanted to do.
That's so interesting because I did your teacher training. I was, like, that's where my components and my obsession with progression and these things come from, I think. And I also, during the pandemic, I mean, as just a teacher, didn't want to teach digitally. There was something about it that felt kind of like insufficient to the student. It didn't serve them. But for the kinds of students also that I was fascinated by teaching, because that hand spot or being there was integral to the process for me. Yeah. How have you seen in the past few years, like converting digital, you know, in person? Like, what is your relationship as a, I don't want to say a technophobe because I don't think that's right, but as a kind of like technologically adverse? Adverse?
I'm not even adverse, but just like I think like you said, like I really appreciate the in-person. And I would have to say that I ended up doing a lot of teaching virtually, especially, you know, a year ago when NECA wasn't running full steam. And I did learn to really appreciate the value of it. And the student and myself as a teacher did get value out of it. But there was something about the hands-on, like you said, putting your hands on a student and guiding them through something that I missed.
Yeah.
And in terms of moving forward, I feel like I want to let other people who are more excited about the digital teaching platform move forward with it. And I'm happy to recommend people who do teacher training workshops digitally, like if that's how it is.
Interesting.
Serenity is a huge advocate. I am as well, but Serenity really holds this within our community, is the advocacy for accessibility. And that is huge for digital. You know, that someone who's living in, you know, rural Iowa can get an aerial training, hopefully with help with all the rigging from all the right people and things like that. But they can access teachers. We can get a 12-year-old who loves contortion and they can actually get training that will help them learn how to use their body correctly and not get injured. So accessibility from the digital platform is huge. I just prefer myself to work in the physical world. So more recently with my coaching at NECA, I've been really building up the swinging trapeze program, which arguably, because I'm on the other end of safety lines, can't be done digitally. Right? Like I could probably watch someone's swinging trapeze and assist them with their tricks, but there's that visceral.
You would need a puller.
They would need a puller.
Or they would need a puller.
Exactly.
And,
So that's more where I'm going with my coaching now, is the like really improving the in-person stuff that I can do. And also, you know, I'm 51. I'm proud to say I'm 51. And I'm looking at what are the things that I want to be doing as a teacher with my body and my physicality that I can do for a long time. And swinging trapeze and holding safety lines is a little bit easier for me than spotting straps, for example. You know, that's a younger person's spotting process.
Young teacher's game.
Yes,
for sure.
Lots of props and mats. You know, Leah Leor, who works with us, she has her baby on her back in the backpack, and she is rocking the spotting the strap stuff. And she has it all figured out. I'm working, you know, for myself to try to find what is it I can teach for 20 more years that's not going to be damaging to my body.
You said something really interesting before, and it kind of is the cornerstone of, I think, what you and your sister have contributed to aerial arts in the US, and subsequently it's spread all over the world, which is that kind of breakdown of like these components of fabric or these components of trapeze, of aerial arts. That's like, this is not even a trick, but like these are the individual building blocks onto which someone can build their own sequencing. But I've almost seen it go in the other direction, where now I see people who are very proficient or have a very large vocabulary, but can't make choreography, or they don't do their own research. How do you contend with that? Or have you noticed anything like that yourself?
I haven't noticed it as much, and maybe it's just because I am doing so much of my work at NECA with the people that I've trained. And so we have a lot of focus on both getting that basic vocabulary and then creating something that's your own.
Right.
So we definitely focus on both sides. The way that I like to talk about what that process is that, we all learned how to memorize things as children. We learned the Pledge of Allegiance, for example, or you learned what the Lord's Prayer or something, if that's your background. We don't know what that is. We can't write our own. So what I like to do is back people up and teach them the alphabet, and then teach them the words, and then teach them to write the poetry on their own.
Okay.
And so that's my philosophy. So I don't skip the poetry part, right? It's not just that you now have the words so that you can memorize the thing and spew it out back. I want you to create the poetry. So there's a step in there that I think coaches have to be really conscious of.
Yeah.
That is that sort of transition from technique and, talking to a student who's a total beginner and doesn't understand proper shoulder position, for example, and telling them, like, here's how you as a beginner who doesn't really know how to talk to your body might want to do things. Here's the proper way to do a footlock. Here's the proper way to do a, cross back straddle. And then at a certain point, you want to be like, oh, you just messed up and that was wonderful. And the student's like, but I didn't do it right. And you're like, no, that's okay. You are ready to not do it right anymore and to solve those problems as they come and to break the technique and rebuild it into your own. And I think as teachers, that's a really interesting moment because it can be kind of scary, when students are doing something wrong or, maybe they're doing something so crazy with your shoulder. You're like, you shouldn't do that. That's going to hurt you. But that's so cool.
Right.
Right. What is that we as teachers can pull that student forward?
Well, and then how do you know when the time is to be like, okay, I've taught you this way to do a crossback straddle, and what you've done isn't what I taught you, and what you did is yours, and so it's valid and in the world, rather than, and what you've done isn't what I taught you, so do it the way I taught you.
So for me, there's a lot of like predictability and movement and choice that I want to see a student taking. So if a student is messing up, and again, I'm using air quotes just so everybody can see that.
Thank you.
When a student messes up, sometimes that's the most beautiful thing in the world. But if they don't know that they're messing up and they can't repeat that, they're an unpredictable person, and unpredictability in the circus leads to injury and it's dangerous. So I want a student to be able to predictably mess up and be like, oh, I just messed up. I know I was supposed to move my left foot the other way. So predictability is huge, both from a safety and from are you ready to take that journey off into this other world, especially when I want to leave a student on their own and be like, you're going to do training on your own. And I want you to try 16 different ways of twisting in that wrap that you just learned.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to leave them in a place where they're going to be safe, but also come back to me and be like, I just figured out 13 different ways. And I might say, oh, there's like 12 of those are things that I've seen before, but that other one, that's really cool. Let's go further with them.
So we've talked about students and kind of training them. Teachers now, right? Like you said, your background was like you were just kind of like thrown into teaching high wire and teaching fire and all these things. Now, when you're teaching and when you're hiring, how important is it that a person just kind of knows how to coach? Like I interviewed Victor Foma, and he was like, I could literally teach someone tennis. Like he's first of all, he's Victor, and he's like, I know how to coach. I know what a body looks like. How important to you is it that a person know the discipline versus know how to coach?
That's a super interesting question. I think it depends on who they're teaching. I feel like for real beginners, it's a little bit easier to access the experience from people who've gone through that. I don't know if you remember from the teacher training you did with us umpteen years ago, but the start of our week-long workshop, we invite the teachers, the trainees, to take a class. And I actually teach the class like they're complete newbies and physically untested complete newbies. And I ask them to experience what doing something wrong feels like and what the pain of it actually feels like. and the fear of being up in the air for the first time, for example, and the intimidation of walking into a room at a circus school.
Right.
You know, that experience of what it is like to be a beginner, carrying extra weight on your body, being hypermobile, not having any flexibility, like all the things real beginners walk into a class with. I think someone who is not experienced in that, it's harder for them to teach at that level. Mm-hmm. Whereas someone who is an athletic trainer who knows bodies, yeah, they could come in and they could definitely give pointers on straps and give pointers on contortion and give pointers on juggling. Because you can look at body mechanics, you can look at muscle control, you can look at overall fitness capacities. And then I think then it flips over once again to super, super high level instruction, where you do really need to have a capacity to understand the really refined technique that might take someone from, basic sit to ankles in the back of the swinging trapeze to double twist to ankles from standing on the trapeze. So I think to answer your question, like, it kind of depends. There's a mid-range that I think a lot of people can jump around from different skills. And we actually sometimes do that within the ProTrack program is, I might take Zebediah, who's the most amazing sort of parkour, German wheel, sear wheel, juggling, manipulation, trampoline guy, and I'd be like, hey, can you teach my trapeze gal for the day? And he might see tricks or positions or movements that I just never see because I'm just embedded in the culture of that apparatus.
Interesting. Yeah, sure.
And then Tony Duncan, who's a world champion juggler, used to perform with Nimble Arts and still teaches at NECA, he'd be like, oh, there's this new trick I'm working on. Can you take a look at it? And, I could use my sort of trapeze background and be like, I think the left ball is going too high, so it's not going over the top of the other one. And, you can see that because you have an eye for it.
That question came from not only our conversation, but someone told me that you're not offering contortion as a discipline at NECA right now.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because you don't have a high level contortion coach. Like when I was here, we had Salam. Exactly. Was so lovely.
Yeah. So we offer flexibility classes and we can do quite a high level of flexibility, but contortion is that tip over into real technique, real understanding of physical anatomy, some experience of what the body needs for those specific positions.
And what it feels like to be in those positions.
And
it's a sensation.
Exactly.
You mentioned now that you're 51, proudly, you mentioned that as you're teaching now, you're like exploring different ways to do that and what that means moving forward. Are you still performing and are you still exploring what that means moving forward?
I would love to still be performing.
I mean, if the world were in a way that would make sense.
Totally. So there's a couple different things. So I'm an identical twin, so I have sort of this mirror of what my 51-year-old body could be doing. So Serenity is still doing some performing.
Okay.
She's really shifted over to tree dancing and like doing arborist work with an arborist. We've both been trained in all the arbor work, and so there's a lot of that. So that's where her focus is. I had mono about 4 years ago, and mono is a really interesting disease because it has, my experience with it is I have what I refer to as long haul mono, which I didn't know was a thing until people started talking about long haul COVID. So I basically had chronic fatigue for about 2 years, and hid it by,
Being Elsie Smith,
being Elsie Smith and pretending that I didn't have it. But that plus like a dislocated foot joint, like those, a couple of things basically meant that I wasn't able to train and I was exhausted for about 3 years. And then the pandemic hit. So I have hopes of, like I think many of us do, of getting back into shape and getting back into what my pre-mono fitness level was.
Yes.
But it's harder now.
Yes.
So I don't know where that's going to go. And I don't know if I want it as well. I'm definitely at that place where, gosh, it would be a part-time job to get fully back into shape again. And I don't know if I want that part-time job right now. I'm enjoying hiking and, swimming in the lake. And those are all really great fitness activities, but they don't get you ready for swinging up in the sky in front of an audience.
Right.
So it's, we'll see how it goes.
Cool. I think that's really nice. And I think a lot of people probably need to hear that too, that you can have a career that's fulfilling and still be very involved in the circus community and not have to be at peak performing shape.
And I think it's actually really important for people who choose coaching as their career that, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to be a really amazing coach. I mean, the amount of time I spend reviewing my students' videos, thinking about new ways of helping them move, trying to figure out when the student is stuck, how I can unstuck them. Like that's my full-time job, plus all of the stuff that goes around that full-time job. And to try to be a really amazing coach and a really peak fitness level performer, it's hard to do both. It's totally possible. I did it for some time, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And I think if we can just really appreciate the teachers and not expect them to also be practitioners at the same level as the students they're teaching, I think everybody's going to get to a better and higher level if we respect everybody for what their role is in the circus.
Mm-hmm. So good. Yes. Final question. I ask this to everyone. What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career? So I started this podcast, I'll tell you, because I wish that I wanted to make something that if when it was called intensive, my intensive year of at NECA, I could listen to while I was stretching and hear the stories of professional circus artists out in the world and what their advice would be to someone like me.
Yeah.
So now I've created this podcast and now I'm coming to my first coach to ask her the question that I created this podcast all around, which is, what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
What I would say to myself is actually kind of how I approached this weird life that I've lived. Some people are like, how did you get from no running water, electricity in a cabin in the middle of the woods to this circus life? Like, how did you get there?
And not just any circus life, but like a multi-million-dollar facility that like is the only one in America that was built for circus.
Yes, thank you. It is kind of remarkable. But yes, it's this thing, and is a whole community that built it for sure. It wasn't just me. But what would I say to myself is, I got here because I just said yes to everything. Partly because I kind of needed the work. So whenever anybody said, I want to hire you for this thing, I was dumb enough to be like, of course, $18 a day. I am so on it. But literally by saying yes to everything, I get to experience so many things and cross paths with the most amazing people. And it didn't mean that I wasn't scared. I didn't, want to say no to things. But I think in general, if we can lead our lives through the lens of, yes, I'll do that thing. Yes, you're asking me to come help you with something I know nothing about, but I'll learn about it while I'm doing it. I feel like it's really easy to say no and not really know that we're saying no as well.
Yeah.
With social media and devices and,
also internal fear.
Oh, and internal
right?
fear, but also like, it's just easy to be like, no, I'd rather sit on the sofa and watch Netflix. It wasn't an option when I was a kid. You had to actually go to a movie theater to watch a movie. But so it was easier, I think, for me at that time in my life to say yes to all these other things because there was like nothing else. But I think just as a general overall philosophy, like, go ahead and say yes to doing things. Go ahead and say yes to meeting that person, seeing that show, helping out backstage, usher. Be a roust about, if someone says, come visit me on tour for 3 days, you're going to sleep on my sofa. Like, do it. Go sleep on that sofa.
Yeah.
Don't be dumb about it. Don't spend $2,000 on a plane ticket to go sleep on someone's sofa because you might get the gig for it.
Right.
But if you have $2,000 to blow, go ahead and do that thing because you say yes wisely, but say yes as much as you can.
That's great advice. Elsie Smith, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. It's so awesome to chat with you. In our little mat tent.
In our little fort. We'll post a picture on the Patreon. Sign up, patreon.com/theartistathlete.
That was my interview with Elsie Smith. And I want to point out, as I was listening to the replay of this episode, a bias that I know that I have toward comparing the National Circus School of Montreal and the New England Center for Circus Arts, or really any other program. I'm surrounded by alumni and students of the National Circus School all the time. And NECA and ENC are literally a 5-hour drive from each other. So it's hard not to be influenced by or compare the two programs. Was it fair to Elsie? I don't know. Is it fair to you guys in this show? Not really. This summer I'll be in Europe and hopefully get to explore a few more circus schools there. Clearly, I got a bias. I'm not a journalist, but there we go. So Elsie provided some really great advice during this interview. Her first piece of advice was to become a twin. So if you really want to be a great circus artist, become a twin. Obviously, I'm just kidding. This episode, though, did explore one of the age-old paradigms that this podcast and my entire business is set up to do. It explores what does it mean to be an artist versus an athlete, an entertainment versus high art, and the question of what does it mean to be a generalist versus a specialist? Is it more important to have one act, one discipline that you have mastered so completely that you do it differently and probably it's hard to say better, but better than anyone else in the world? Or are you more likely to get work? Is it preferable to be able to do a little bit of everything, to dabble in some acrobatics, juggling, aerial arts, clowning? If you have a whole bunch of everything, does that make you a more viable circus artist to be employed? Elsie was reflecting on this, even though she was a specialist. She is a specialist. She says, I'm an aerialist, I can't tumble. Not all aerialists can't tumble. She says, I'm an aerialist, but I can't tumble. However, the admission process into the New England Center for Circus Arts now requires that artists have a wide range of skills and capabilities. And this is cool because it creates versatile and interesting performers. However, the world also misses out on all of those performers who get obsessed and specialize over one thing that they do incredibly well. So overall, your best bet is to try everything and get really good at something and be really secondarily good at something else, is what Elsie said. And a little tip, because I did go to NECA, have a ground skill and an aerial skill. If you're an aerialist, it is best to have a ground act of some sort and be really nice and friendly to everyone you meet because you never know who could be getting you a job. If you're interested in the New England Center for Circus Arts enrolling, you can go to necenterforcircusarts.org. And for aerial training tips and inspiration, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at _artist_athlete. My website's The Artist Athlete. I'm on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. And if you love what you're listening to, you can't get enough, and you want to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. We will not be doing an episode next week because I am putting together a very large episode for the week after with Jeroen Lipschitz of the Australian company Circa. Can't wait for you guys to hear that. Tune in a couple weeks. But if you're a Patreon, I'll talk at you next week, friends, fans, and foes. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, my name is Noah and I do hand balancing. Hi, my name is Woody and I do Leo walk. Thank you for listening to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Hi everyone, I'm Dominique, a ground acrobat, trapeze artist, and coach, currently bringing circus to the extremely cold but very beautiful Northern Ontario, Canada. Circus has changed my life and I'm so grateful to everyone in this community. Find me on Instagram at DomUpsideDown or my website domupsidedown.com.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete Podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and swing and rope by night. I really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.